Welcome back to the Wrong Advice Podcast. I'm your host, John Picciuto, and I'm very excited to have my good buddy, the one and only Mr. Joe Cardamone, on with us today. Joe, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, so excited, dude. I'm really glad we were able to get you on the pod today. Can you give the listeners a quick introduction to who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Joe. Hey, no, I'm a photographer based out of Maryland. I'm also a father and an actor. Surprisingly enough. So I got a lot of other stuff, but I'm assuming we're gonna get into it. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, no, I know. We met, many moons ago in the NFT space, which feels like a lifetime ago. I have a pre-reoccurring trope where, you know, the best part about the NFT space was the friends you make along the way, and I'm glad to be able to call you one of them. Tell me a little bit about, you know, your life, like how you got started with photography, you know, your path to where, you know, you got yourself sitting in front of me for this podcast today.
Yeah, so I've been creative. I mean, I think everybody's born creative, but I was drawing and stuff like my whole life, right, since I was a kid. And my parents were always like super supportive of the creativity aspect, right? But they were also like, so they were like, yeah, this is awesome. This looks great. Keep doing this. I was like, awesome, cool. But then they were also the old school mindset of like, but you got to get a real job. Like, you still got to go to school. Like, you can't, you know, art isn't really a thing you can do. So they was like, it was a weird supportive, but not supportive. So, you know, I did creative stuff my whole life. Got a bunch of 9-to-5s. And then in 2016, I got a Nikon, was it D3300 for Christmas. And I was just going to use it to just photograph the kids. Like I wanted like a quote unquote professional camera, right, to take great photos. And I was just going to use it to document kids, which I still do, but like that was the only reason I wanted it. And then I did that and stuff, and it was cool. And then I realized very quickly, like I'm not a just straight like landscape photographer. Like I'm not just going to go out in the like fields and be like, oh, look at this vista and stuff, right? Because like for me, I don't have the eye for it. Like I'll go out and I'll be like, oh my god, look at this field with all this stuff, and I'll take it and I'll be like, it's a tree, like what am I doing? Like yeah. So June of 2017, a couple friends invited me down to Baltimore's Pride Parade, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna go make pictures today. Like I'm actually gonna go like with intent to be a photographer today. It's like, what better space than surrounded by friends and celebration and stuff to like go capture moments. So that's when I consider myself like actually starting photography. And surprisingly enough, man, like those are still some of my favorite photos. I know as, you know, artists, you look back on early stuff and you're like, oh, this is shit. And then, oh, I forgot to ask you, we can curse on here, right? Like,
yeah. Fuck is my favorite word.
Okay, all right, yeah. But so, you know, I was like, there's still some of my favorite photos, and there's a lot in between that's bad. But that's basically where I started photography is June of 2017.
That's cool. But you mentioned like kind of growing up that it was something that you were interested in. Do you remember like what your first camera was?
So, well, photography, like, it's funny because like that didn't enter my creative space until like 2015.
Oh,
like,
okay.
I never really even thought about it. And the only reason I thought about it is because I started acting first. And a bunch of my friends were the tech heads, right? Like they were the ones who were like, oh, we just got this new red camera, we want to play with it and all that stuff. And I'm not shy, so that's how I got into acting. I was like, oh, well, I'll be in front of the camera, I don't care.
Yeah.
And so they were playing with their toys and I was discovering acting. But then while they were doing that, you know, because we were a small group, I got to like learn about lenses and depth of field and all this cool stuff. And I was like, oh, it's cool. You know what? It'd be kind of nice to have like a real camera. And again, it wasn't even like, I'm going to be a photographer. It was like, oh, I'd like it because I've got ADHD. So like all shiny new things are like fun and exciting for me, right?
Same.
So I was like, yeah. So I was like, oh, cool new toy. Like I got to have fun with. And also like, you know, capture moments with the kids. That's how it came to be. And then I discovered like it hit me like a lightning bolt. Like that after that, the prep grade, I was like, oh shit, like I love this. This is part of me. Like I want to tell stories doing this. This is cool.
Is there like a specific photo from that day that you can like look at and say, this is the one that kind of like started it for me?
Yeah, I just two of them actually. So one of them is the first time I like tried composing a frame. And it's this guy probably in his 60s or so, and he's got these aviator sunglasses and like a leather, like it's not a cop hat, but you know, like the design, like the cop hats, but it's, and he's got this huge cigar and he's smiling walking by me, but behind him, somebody with blown bubbles. So there's 3 bubbles, like one over here, one over top of his head, one on the other side. And he's smiling at me with the cigar in his mouth. and it's just framed so cool. And I've got like I'm not reflected in his lenses. Like it's I consider it one of my favorite photos because like I hit all the marks, and I love the photo, right? So that one, and then one of them, another one was the leader for one of the marching bands. It was so hot, and they were all decked out in their uniforms, and he's got his whistle in his mouth, and it's a side shot, and he's got like one long thing of sweat coming down his face. And
Hmm.
because the sun was behind him, he's backlit with like a ring light around his head, and although you can see some of the reflection of the sweat from the coming down, I was like, oh, this is cool. This,
Yeah. You know, it's kind of funny. I have like a very similar story. The first time I went out, like with intent to create, I got a photo of a guy like drinking coffee against, you know, somewhere in New York City. He was just posted up against a wall. But every time I think about my creative journey and like how I got here, I think of that photo. It sticks out so fresh in my mind, like I took it yesterday, even though it was, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. But it was
yeah,
very much like I can look back on it and say that was the photo that kind of started the obsession with, you know, street and documentary photography, and that's sort of led me to where I am today, which is pretty cool.
yeah, that's awesome. Those those moments are so important to like hold on to too, right? And
Yeah,
it's wild how they stay in your head like that too, right? Like you
yeah,
just described exactly like the photo, and it was and me too, right? Like that was 7 years, 6.5 years
yeah,
ago now, right? Like, and
yeah.
when I talk about them, I can see them in my head, like they're immediate.
I know.
So,
I think if I ever lose that feeling that I have for that
mm,
photo in general, like that, the process that went into it and the feeling that I get in my gut when I look at it, I think I'll know it's time to stop taking pictures, but I don't necessarily see that happening.
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
I'm super curious. You mentioned that like you were not really into like the whole landscape thing. Clearly, your work is more people focused. Like you said, your kids. You do a lot of documentary style music photography as well. Talk to me about sort of the process over the last 6 years, sort of developing who Joe is as a photographer, as an artist, and like what went into building sort of your photographic style.
yeah. So I will say I do take occasional landscapes,
Hmm.
but not in the sense of everybody. Like when you hear landscape, you think of like the mountains and stuff. Like
Right.
I got kids. I
More
can't
urban
travel all over.
scapes. Yeah.
I can't travel the world. Like there's some fields and stuff I've got because I learned how to do it right now. But like that's not my jam, right? Like when I go out to think about making photos, like I'm not like, oh, let me go to the field, right? Like it's like, oh, let
Yeah.
me go down to the city, right? So honestly, when I look back on it and think about it, I think the how I like to create is opportunity. So the best way to describe that is, you know, you've got a bunch of people who shoot something very well and they've got their niche, and that's amazing. Like I think it's great if you find something that you're passionate about and you stay curious and passionate about and you keep developing. That's awesome. I don't have a niche. I don't. I don't have something where if you said, all right, you can only shoot one thing today, I would probably just be like people, and that's too ambivalent to, or you know, to be like, well, what does that mean? It's like something with people in it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But opportunity for me. So like when I go to make photos, we got a new skate park down in Baltimore, right? So I'll be like, oh,
Ooh.
I'm gonna go to the skate park. That's it. Like I don't in my head, I'm not. Oh, I want to capture a kickflip, and I want to tell a story about this person. But I'm going to the skate park because I know I'm going to make photos, right? And if I know where I'm going, then I just allow whatever is there that I see as a photo in my head before I even pick up the camera
Mm,
is how I try to create on my own. Like client work and stuff is different, right? Like you have, but like
sure.
for myself, it's opportunity based. So I like to put myself in places where I'll have opportunity to make photos.
I actually really like that because it is completely opposite of what I do. Like, it's so funny. I love doing street photography. It's probably my biggest passion in life. Just whenever I get an opportunity to walk around and just
Mm,
like take photos, like it's what makes me truly happy. It's not like commercially viable. I don't make money doing it. It's just something that I love. But I go out with absolutely no thought process at all. I'm just like literally going to fucking walk
mm,
around, take pictures, and see like what kind of brings itself to me. And I think it's very interesting that you have like a bit of a departure, going somewhere with the intent of making photos. I've always found when I'm trying to make something happen, I fail. But like when I
mm-hmm.
guess the opportunity aspect of things, when it just sort of comes to me, you know, you get that image and you're like, oh shit, I can't believe like I took that photo. Like I can't believe that's mine. Like I think about that a lot sometimes when I look at
Mm.
my stuff, which I think is probably the most rewarding aspect of photography. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, wow, I can't believe that's mine. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And
Yeah.
yeah, the opportunity is more about like just it's about putting myself in a destination, right?
Hmm.
So, like I said, you go to the skate park, right? But it's also down at the harbor in the inner harbor in Baltimore, right? So, I don't go and let's say it's kids skate day. I'm not going to take photos of like kids skateboarding, right? Like I
Yeah.
won't. Like,
Same.
so
I
that,
hear
maybe
you.
that's just me.
Yeah.
But so like if I get there and that's happening, then guess what? I'm down at the inner harbor now, and I'll be like,
Hmm.
all right, let me walk around, see what I can find,
Yeah.
right? So it's a lot of it, just like with everything in life, is just about doing it, right? Like for me, it's just about doing it. If I put myself out there and I'm going to capture often, I'm going to keep growing in my style. I'm going to find things that I wouldn't otherwise find if I had some kind of concrete idea in my head. And if I didn't get that concrete idea, then it's a wash and a failure, and I go home, right? Like no, I don't. I don't think that way. Like I just put myself out there and say like, well, something else will come up, or let's see what's around this corner.
Yeah, no, I like that. There is a lot of intentionality in your work. I spent a lot of time doing kind of a deep dive through a lot of your NFT work and your socials. And what sort of blew me away is like I can pick a Joe photo out of like
Mm.
the batch. Like I know, which I think is something that I struggle with is like finding something that feels like me. But like when I was going through your work, and if I like was able to compare it to other people's stuff, I could be like, that's a Joe photo, which I think is cool because you've gone through the process over the last 7 years of developing a style and an artistic eye that is representative of like who you are and like what you're trying to articulate, which I struggle with at times, which I think is cool. Talk to me about how you were able to sort of do that. Like I know it's 7 years in, you've been doing it long enough now that sort of process comes more naturally to photographers. But what was it about developing this sort of style and artistic vision that you have? Because I know sort of unusually for from a photography perspective is you shoot everything in black and white, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll just hit on that and I'll go back to your. But yeah, so I shoot because I have a mirrorless camera. The viewfinder is also in black and white, which is really cool, right? So I shoot in monochrome, and because the viewfinder is in black and white, when I'm going to make the photo, I see the frame in black and white, and then the preview on the back is in black and white. And then when I import into Lightroom, I import using the camera settings, so it comes over in black and white. So even all the color photos you see, I don't see any of them in color, period, until I decide to be like, you know what, that was a pretty sunset. Let me make that color. Or I'm like, the sunset looks really cool in black and white, or with people or whatever. So yeah, so I shoot everything, and that's part of my style in the sense that one of the things I like to try to do, and this is going to come off trying to sound shady, but I don't mean it shady. So I don't want to use, for me, I don't want to use color to tell a story, and I think that can hinder me a little bit because color can be a great thing to tell a story. I see beautiful photos where like it's got this red piece in it, and that's what draws you to the photo, and then you see the rest of the story, and like that's amazing, right? But for me, if I see that and I say like if I can't tell the story without that color, just the color is the only thing that's composing this photo, making this a photo, then I don't want to tell it, right?
Mm.
So black and whites help me to kind of do that. It forces me to look at things differently, literally different angles, or just like this. If I'm gonna capture this and just change it to color because it'll be pretty, then it's probably not for me. And again, sometimes I do that just because I like to create and do play around and have fun. But overall, that's kind of how I approach it. But the journey, it's funny. It's gonna sound like a cop out answer, but it's not. I shoot what I love, and that's been my biggest anchor point. And it really isn't much deeper than that for me. So like, if you see, like, I've got a photo of on my Instagram of my buddy Eddie, who's one of my favorite all time rappers. Like he's probably top five living and dead lyricists that I've ever met. So he was having a rehearsal for a show he was putting on, and a lot of times I just like to watch for a little bit to see like what feels. I'm not trying to make a great. I'm not looking at it going like, "Ooh, this would be an awesome picture," right? For me, when I pick up the camera, it's already a photo in my head. So like when I'm watching him rehearse and stuff, I'll see something and be like, I love how he did that, or like that looks really neat. Like, so it's just about what connects with me, and I appreciate you. I really appreciate you. All artists do. Like, I can pick out a dope piece. Like, that's probably one of the biggest compliments, especially a photographer can get. And I think part of that is because I shoot what I love. Like, it has to connect with me, and it's a photo in my head before I even pick up the camera. So I feel like that translates a lot because you're not going to see anything of mine that is. I'm doing it just. I don't know.
Authentically.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not doing anything just to pretend like, hey, I can also do this thing. Like it's got to connect with me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. I completely agree, honestly, because similarly, I want to make sure that when I'm creating something, it's with intent, right? I
Mhm.
think a lot of times there can be malintent when it comes to photography. Like there's commercial reasons, there are, social media reasons to make certain things look a certain way or feel a certain way. And I don't really relate to that at all.
Yeah.
So I appreciate when someone comes to their artwork from an authentic place where they want to create for a specified reason, which is their own love of the work, which to me means the world from a creative process. Because if you're doing something without the added pressure of commercial access to it or money or whatever, it comes through much more authentic to who you are as a photographer. That being said, from a commercial perspective, you've had a pretty wonderful success in the NFT space. I mentioned we met through the NFT
Mm.
space. I was sort of shocked to see how many people have collected your work. I mean, you've sold a fuck ton of NFTs, and that's so awesome. Talk to me about sort of what that whole, relationship has been like for you with the NFT space and the NFT photography space, and sort of how your experience has gone through creating digital art.
Yeah, it's been cool and interesting and weird and all the things in between, right?
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, for me, I think it comes down to just being again, like it. Who you're listening to here is who I try to be everywhere, right? Like this is just me. Like I need to be able to lay my head down at night, right? Like so, regardless of medium or art or sales or anything, right? Like I need to be able to be comfortable, like going to bed at night, right?
Hmm.
So that's how I try to just operate in day-to-day life. And I think I've been fortunate where some people have connected with that on a level, be like, oh, I appreciate you as an artist, and oh, look at this photo, this is pretty dope. Like I'd like to have this too. Um, so I think part of it is just connecting with people who you can connect with that also like your art. So I wish I had some kind of like I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't been like the next level up for me is because I don't have the strategy marketing brain to like I mean I'm sure I could learn it but like I'd rather spend my time doing something
Yeah,
else.
like actually
So
making work versus,
right,
you
right,
know,
right.
yeah.
So I think it's been cool because I've been able to get a lot of my one of the ways I view the NFT space and this may have helped a little bit too is when I got on, people were talking about like, oh, don't put too much out or only put like one or two pieces, or else like people won't buy it because they'll think you're flooding your own market and all that stuff. And for me, there was a happy medium, right? It was, yeah, you don't want to like put on your entire archive of work and have 2,000 photos out there for people to buy because you just be like, what is this? This is crazy. Um, but I want it to be a catalog. If we're talking about preserving our artwork on this blockchain technology and it's going to live forever and stuff like that, I want it to be like a catalog. I want people to look at it in 10 years. Like you said, like I did a deep dive in your work, Joe, and the breadth of all the things you photograph and I can still see your style in it. I want that same thing on here too, right? So that I think also opened the door a little bit more for like if I had just done black and white portraiture, maybe a couple of people would have connected with it. But because I had that and music and a couple landscapes and self portraits and all this other stuff out there, there were different things for people to look at and connect with that wouldn't have been available if I was just like, oh, I'm only supposed to put one thing out and hopefully somebody buys it eventually.
Yeah. You mentioned that, like, from a creative perspective, like, there was always a creative aspect to your life, whether it was acting, and doing things when you were growing up and stuff. I know you spent some time in the military. When you
Mm.
were sort of post high school in that, like, time frame of, say, like 20 to 25, was like the idea of like being an actor or the idea of being a photographer even like remotely any sort of concept in your own mind?
No, no. Part of the reason why, so I'll caveat a little bit and say, like, I do appreciate the people I met and what the military did for me. I think I've learned a lot about the United States and how the military operates, where I don't have the same views as I did before I joined.
Sure.
Um, but it, I part of the reason I joined was because I didn't know I hadn't. I remember waking up one day. I was living in my friend's apartment on his couch. That was my room, was the living room, and the couch was my bed. And I had a job and one of his other roommates was a dealer, and they would have parties like at like 3 a.m. in the living room, which was my room,
Yeah.
right? When I have to get up for work. And I remember waking up one morning and I'd be like, what have you done, dude? Like to myself, like, what have you done? Like, what are you doing? Like look back on yourself and say like, oh yeah, I did that. I'm proud of myself. And so part of the reason I joined the military was like, I probably could have done something different and accomplished the same thing. But like, I looked at it and said like, boot camp is really, really hard, right? And it's only you. Like it's you against the mental aspect and the physical aspect. And if you can accomplish that, that's pretty huge, and that's on you. And that's a cool like thing to be proud of. And you get to go to college. They get you with the college, right? So that's a part of the reason why I joined too. Is like, it's something I can accomplish and look back on and be like, you did this, you got through this. And like, hey, now I go to college because like I said, college was the only way to, get a job. Right. Like, so, that was my reasoning. But so, creativity was never a part of like,
yeah, it's funny. I didn't have a similar experience. I didn't join the military or anything like that, but I went through the whole process of like going to high school, going to college, getting that first job out of college. And like, I was always doing really random creative things on the side, like whether it was writing for an online blog or whatever I was doing, but I was always keeping it like very far out of mind because I was like, oh, I can't do those things. I'm John who needs to make a lot of money, or John that needs to do X, Y, Z. And it took a lot of time to sort of find the place where I was ready to accept the fact that I needed to be doing something else. Like I wasn't happy. I was failing miserably at life. And I just was like ultimately a bitter prick and like just not fulfilled at all. And it took like going through some really shitty times, in the 2020 with the pandemic and everything for me to figure out that like I wanted so much more out of life, right? There's so much more that you can ask for yourself than just like waking up, going to work and like punching a clock. And I didn't have that sort of mentality of, oh, I'm going to be a photographer or, oh, I'm going to do this. But it eventually like sort of brought itself to me and I found it. And it's been like the most rewarding experience of my life. And similarly with this podcast, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad like, it sucks to go through like perspective is one of those things. Like, don't you wish like sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you'd be like, if I could like just take the perspective aspect and just hand it to you and you can just put it in here like a little slot and be like, oh, that's what you're talking. Oh, okay. Because it's one of those things that unfortunately you have to go through. Like, and 9 times out of 10, it's rough. Like usually you gain perspective through challenge and change
and loss.
Yeah. So,
I was talking to
sucks, but it's great.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who I recently had on the podcast, and she was on the podcast about 4 weeks ago, and when we had the podcast, she was like, "My life is great, everything's perfect, work is perfect, my relationship, I'm engaged, like everything's great." And then she had like a couple rough weeks, and we were talking yesterday, and she was like, I'm so bitter and I'm so pissed and I'm so like snippy at work and like I hate everyone, like just like really just not happy. And she was like, how was it so short ago? I was like so happy and so content. I was like, you got to realize like sometimes like going through really shitty stuff or like things that are like bringing you down are meant to be perspective providing so that when you have things that are good, you appreciate them a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And it's also true to remember to give ourselves some grace and that our issues and other people's issues are valid. Right. Mm-hmm. Like one of the things that really messed me up so I got deployed to Iraq, right? So I was there for a year. When I got home, I remember standing in line at a grocery store and somebody was complaining about like the length of time in a line. And in my head, like I didn't like do anything, but like in my head, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, do you understand what I just, like I literally was dealing with life and death every single day for a solid year. And you're complaining about like a line that's going to take you an extra 3 minutes or something, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that really helped me heal from that is that perspective of understanding like, oh no, like that person didn't go through what you went through and it doesn't make their frustration any less valid. Sometimes things are like, you got to be able to like let some shit go. But like at the same time, it's not for me to judge that, right?
Yeah.
Like they're just venting out themselves in the same way that I would be for whatever issues are in my life. So
I love that. I love that perspective, dude. I think that is so crucially important. It's a time thing, right? So you spent a year in a place that must have felt like 10 times that amount of duration, right? You're, like you said, you're literally dealing with life and death on a daily basis. It puts into perspective that the amount of time that we have is incredibly short, and it allows you to like sort of create a little bit of breath for yourself on like everyday shit like that. I find myself getting frustrated over something, and I immediately am able to, like, just being 37 and having lived through life, being able to snap myself out of it quickly, because realizing it doesn't matter. Why am I going to get mad at the fucking cashier who's taking too long to count out my change? It's like, where am I rushing to? Like, there's nowhere I'm going. Nothing in life is a rush. But we have this like dumb monkey brain that makes us think that we have to be everywhere at a certain amount of time and everything's blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's not what it's about. And like when you can appreciate things like you can, to the fact that there's no guarantees, life is short, we need to be very happy and content with where we're at, it allows you to sort of take a breath and be like, okay, dude, I know you just cut me off and I want to crash into the back of your car, but it's not that serious.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think, like, to also remember though that, like, emotions are internal, like, triggers for external stimulus, right?
Ooh.
So like you feeling frustrated that's why I said, like, it's valid, right? Like, it's the other thing is, like, the perspective is a great thing, but it sometimes I feel like for myself, I have to really try to like balance it out, like, consciously, because it can tend to get to the point where it overswings, where it's like, what's that matter? It's like, no, sometimes things, you're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be, because the other thing is, there's a flip side to those emotions, and that's happiness and fun, right? It's the opposite of the, frustrated and bored, right? Like, so if you sweep away the emotions as well, that it's not a big deal, then the ones that you want to feel and you want to hold on to last a little bit longer, to feel that they're in the same boat, and you can tend to wipe those off the board as well.
Do you think fatherhood has given you like a little bit more appreciation for that? Because I feel like time as an adult changes a lot when you have kids. Not that I have any, but all of my friends and family do. But do you think like fatherhood has taught you that?
Yeah, I think so. I think fatherhood has helped me refine my feelings on that. I think Iraq did that for me. Unfortunately, I wish it would have been fatherhood. That would have been a little bit more of a joyful foundation for the perspective. But I being 22 and realizing, oh, I could lay down and just not get up in the morning. Like, and not just like in a rhetorical sense, or like, oh, like a legitimate real thing. Like, that can happen to me and I would never know, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could go to bed right now and that's it for me. So internalizing that and working through that over the years, like, has given me that. And then fatherhood has helped me to like understand the good aspects of time being fleeting, right? With each phase of the kids' lives, there's pros and cons, right? Like when they're a kid, people are like, oh, hold on to the moments, don't make it rush. And that's true. But at the same time, the next moments give you different things. Like when they start to talk, they can say, I love you to you, right? So you have stuff to look forward to and stuff you miss. So it's helped me to try to understand the balance of what all that means.
Yeah, no, I like that. I'm curious, has any of your past experience, whether it's deployments, whether it's trials, tribulations, how do you think it affects your work? Like, how do you build it into, or is it cathartic in any way? Like, do you utilize photography as a tool, as therapy, as an outlet? Like, how is it sort of like come full circle back to that?
I think my only outlet for it is choosing creative aspects that I have control over. Because within the military, and especially deployment, like, there's no control over your life, right? Like, everyone else is controlling it, and you got to do what you got to do. So like with photography, I get to make the photo I want to make. I get to edit how I want to edit. I get to choose whether anyone sees it or not, right? So like, I have full control over that creative process, and for me, that's liberating. Like, it's my story to help tell. And then same thing with like drawing, right? Like, drawing is the same aspect. Like, I get to decide what I draw. It's all in my head. I get to release it or not, et cetera, et cetera. Acting's a little different. There's a lot of gatekeeping, but I just like, for me, it's fun telling a story with other people. Like, that's more of a collaborative, like, escape thing. But it's funny because it's never a conscious thought when I'm making my art. I think I have one project that I want to do that's associated with the military, telling stories for veterans type thing. But that is like a project, right? Like that's an idea and a vision I have to do. But as far as like my day-to-day creative process, I'm sure it comes out in the sense of I look for opportunity and I just live in the moment for the thing. So that's part of what we were just talking about with perspective and finding balance on your time here and not rushing it and not, not being apathetic either. So I think in how I create, it's probably part of it. But as far as like what and when and like the content, like I don't see much of it in it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
No, that's fair. I just, when I look at like, there are times where like when I'm going through shit, I'll notice that I'm having more dark images, more moody images when I'm like
Mm,
feeling certain ways. Like if I'm happy, which is pretty often, I err towards more like airy and light and, try to create that what I'm feeling. So like it does come into play where sometimes if I'm sad, I make sad images. When I'm happy, I make
sure.
happy images. I don't, a lot of the things that I've gone through in my life are trivial when you compare them to spending a year in Iraq, right? So it's hard to sort of like correlate the two, but I was curious sort of like how that unfolds in your own creative process.
Yeah. I would say going back to it, like they're not trivial though. Like
Yeah.
you had to
Well,
go through them, right? They're your struggles, they're your frustrations, and
yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
I
They're
mean,
valid. Like
my
that's
therapist would completely agree with you, Joe. So that's
they
hey,
actually called me on the way, and this is why we're here, John. I want.
this is an intervention. I'm super curious because, like, as a photographer, I find myself most comfortable behind the camera.
Mm,
Being that you do acting as well, I would rather see nothing more than you have all the success in the world. But I can't relate to the feeling of wanting to be on the other side of things. Being in front of the camera, acting, performing, or even just having my picture taken. I fucking hate it. How is that sort of like happened? Because like I found it much more common for people who are photographers to want to stick to this side of things versus like actually stepping out in front of it. So I'm curious like how that happened for you.
yeah. Well, I would say honestly though, I think you're probably. I mean, the podcast is a version of that, right? Like you're like
Reluctantly.
it's
Reluctantly.
sure, but you do a great job, and you keep a conversation going. You're the one that's leading it, right? Like you're it's the same as like kind of giving a speech at a university or something, right? Like but it's more one-on-one, but you're doing the same thing. You're telling a story, you're crafting something. So I
Yeah.
would say you're doing it. It's not the same as acting, but it's in the same realm. I mean, I don't know, like I honestly like I every time somebody asks me about acting, it's one of those things where I'm like I don't know, I just loved it. Like it's the same level that I felt when I picked up a camera. And it's weird for me because it was never on the board either. My friends got some cameras in 2014, like I said, wanted to play with them. And I was like, I got again, I'm not shy. Like I don't mind talking to different people at any point, like, or being by myself sometimes too, right? Like I just kind of being me whenever I can. So because they were friends, they're like, hey, we want to film something. I was like, well, you need something to film. I'll be your something to film, right? Oh, and it turned out horrible. Like it was a mess. It was a disaster. Like none of us knew what we were doing. But like that led to one of the people in the group finding like a film competition run by Bombay Sapphire Gin, right? And
Oh.
they were like, "Oh, we've got this. Do a short film and submit the idea and stuff like that." So we filmed this whole black and white like auteur, like this serial killer who ends up uh, in the midst of one of his murders getting knocked out in the head and then seeing visions of the person he just murdered, that almost like the telltale heart basically,
Yeah.
right? But the actual person being represented instead of like hearing the heartbeat, right? So we do, and it's funny. It doesn't again, we didn't know it, but that led to a Baltimore County film thing that's called 48-hour film festival. And basically you get a team together, you meet on a Friday night, you pick a genre out of a hat, and then you have 48 hours to write, film, edit, and physically hand in a short film. And then they screen it and give awards and all this stuff, right? So we did that. My buddy and I started writing. I also learned screenwriting through all this too, by the way. So we wrote the short film. we started in it, and I remember sitting in the basement. We had a basement scene. We were tied up with burlap sacks over our head, and it was the middle of July, and it was hot, and we had to turn the air conditioners off because they were loud. And I remember sitting in this burlap sack, going like, "This is cool as shit! Like, this is so much fun! Like, I loved it. This is awesome! Like, here I am just creating a story out of nothing with my friends, and then finding a way to tell it visually, like from stuff we wrote down that just came out of our own head." And so I was like, "This is pretty cool. I like this a lot." And
Yeah.
that's literally how it all came to be. Is I just had the moment where I was like, "This is dope. I like it."
I mean, listen, I think that's an awesome story. I think that it stems a little bit more in my head to the collaborative process. Like, cause I like the act of collaboration with creative
Mm.
people too. It just doesn't extend to in front of the camera. Like, I think that's great. I would just like to be the guy who's like, okay, Joe, put this fucking hot
Sure.
burlap sack on your face. So it's 100 degrees in July
Yeah.
and go nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's cool though. It's funny how I think when you get older, you realize a lot of people would like to be doing different things than like their standard 9 to 5, and
Mm.
the creative life, while incredibly difficult, and the parameters for success are so broad and so wide, it is also wildly fulfilling because it's so hard to do. If everyone could do it, it wouldn't be as fulfilling as it is. And it's because there's like that barrier to success that I think when you find the things that you love, they just fill you up that much more because you get to do just so much different, wild, and cool shit.
I would say too, another barrier to the creative aspect is being in connection with yourself,
Mm.
right? Like both of us talked about why we're creating. Like you saying, like I through the pandemic and all this stuff happened, I realized I needed something more, and you found it in this, right? Me saying I wanted control over my creative aspect and the things that I wanted to tell stories about, right? And I feel like if we as humans could spend a little bit more time introspectively looking at that aspect of ourselves, the tough conversations, or like, why am I feeling this way? Or like, what is the thing that will give me that release or that joy or that contentment, right? So I think part of the barrier is people look at it as, there's a lot of commodification with the art too, right? Like, oh, if I do this, I can sell it. Like, that's the most question people get. If they showed you something they knitted, be like, oh, do you also sell those on Etsy? It's like, do I have to sell them on Etsy? Like, can
Yeah.
I just create some cool shit that I love doing, right? Like, that's cool too. Um, so I think part of it is people approach it from that aspect, which isn't wrong, but it's wrong if you want it to be fulfilling because it's
Yeah.
got to come from here, right? It's got to come internally first. And you have to have that conversation with yourself first of like, what does that look like for me?
Dude,
And
totally. I think that's so crucially important because, like, even from my own photography perspective, like the way my career has sort of like evolved over the last 3 years is like I'm doing a lot of things outside of just taking pictures. And most of the work that I do from a photography perspective is personal work, and the client work that I do typically moves into like more marketing and social media content creation and things like that I never thought I'd be doing that kind of stuff, but it's been from a business perspective so much better, but not like creatively filling. So like while I'm making more money doing things outside of like the art of photography, it's also opened up the ability for me to take more pictures, to rent cooler studio spaces, to just be all around more successful in my art because I'm now creating with a bigger budget and having more opportunities to work with more diversified groups of people. But when you don't like give yourself the space to figure out what that success looks like or define what a path in towards a creative career is successful, you limit your ability to do that. And for a while, I was self-limiting on a scale that was crazy. I could only pay my bills, right, if I was making the money taking pictures or if I was shooting for this client or that client or this. I put myself into a box that like almost fucking bankrupted me. I was just being stupid and ignorant for no reason. And I like that you said that because it's crucial. It's vital to being successful in what you do, like without question, completely.
yeah, yeah. I like one of my goals is to be able to pay my bills as an artist. But what I mean, like, I could technically do that now. I
Mm-hmm.
have a 9 to 5. I'm very fortunate to have a 9 to 5 that's not creative at all. Like, I'm a project manager, right? I just happen to be really good at it. But it's not what I want to be doing, right?
Yeah.
But it allows me to create. Technically, I could go be a full-time photographer tomorrow, but I'd have to do weddings, right? And not that there's anything like wedding photographers, please don't take this wrong. I don't like it doesn't fulfill me,
I
right?
completely
So I
try.
knew if I did that, that it would actually be detrimental to my creative process and my mental health.
Dude,
So
I completely
yeah,
100,000% agree because same.
yeah,
Same. I don't have a 9 to 5. I do everything as freelance, like my own. I own a digital marketing company and a photography company and this podcast. Like I do everything on my own. But I could go shoot weddings. I get asked to do
right,
weddings and shit all the time. But it would suck the life out of me. And that's for me. Like
right, yeah.
there are wedding photographers that make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They're fucking killing it. But it's
And they fucking love it too.
and
And
they
they
love
love
it.
it too. Yeah,
And
that's
I
the big part.
and I love that for them.
Yeah,
That's them. They can do that.
yeah,
It's not. I'm so glad you said that because, and I think a lot of times like you get a bad rap if you number one don't want to shoot weddings and stuff like that. Like people are like, oh, what are you too good for? And I'm like, no, I know it's not for me. Like
right, right.
there are people who are professional and they do this for a reason. I'm not that,
Mm,
and
yeah,
and that's okay.
yeah, 100
Um,
percent.
you mentioned commercial success. I would like to tick back to the NFT stuff for a second because, I mean, dude, not for nothing, pretty fucking cool. You sold an NFT to Seth Green. That's pretty fucking cool. How many people could say that, right?
Yeah.
Was that like sort of like a pinch me moment for yourself? Like when you're looking at like, holy shit, I just sold an NFT to like a incredibly famous human being. Like what did that feel like?
So yeah, definitely surreal. But what's interesting with that, and hopefully, if he ever hears this, hopefully he doesn't mind telling me telling the story. But um, again, him and I were talking unrelated to NFTs. Like we had met in a space, same way you and I had, right? Like I got up on stage, and the first time I ever met him, I remember telling him um, that Can't Hardly Wait's one of my favorite like all time comedies. Like I
Same.
fucking love that movie. And I said, dude, and I know he was the actor, not the writer, but I said, dude, your line, why you always gotta be wasting my flavor, is something that me and my friends said way more than any like teenage kid should have been saying. Like it's just cringy. But like I just wanted to tell him that like I appreciated him as an actor and just like I grew up with him, right, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we just kind of stayed in contact, just talking life and stuff like that, right? And he brought it up one day. He was interested in the power plant series I was doing. He's like, "Oh, it looks really cool," and stuff like that. I was like, "Oh, thanks." He's like, "You're gonna mint it?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm definitely gonna mint it." He's like, "Oh, let me know when you do." I was like, "Okay." And in my head, I wasn't like, "Oh, Seth's gonna buy my thing." I was just like, he wants to know when it's out there in the world. Maybe he'll like yeah, I don't know. Like literally, it didn't cross my mind that he was like gonna buy it. And then I minted it, and I just messaged him. I was like, "Oh, you told me to let you know when it was minted." He's like, "All right, cool. I'm gonna get it." I was like, "So say what now? Say what now? Really?" And I was like, "Okay." Yeah, and then so that was cool. It was again. I think it's so important to be authentically yourself, right? Because
But is there any aspect of that like when you've been collected by some very well-known collectors in the space, let alone, famous human beings like Seth Green, is there validation that comes with that, or because you come from it from a very sort of humble, authentic place, it's just like a cherry on top of some being able to, be happy that you just get the opportunity to create this stuff?
so I would say it's both. I'm a human being. Like even with all this perspective and the things I've gone through in life, I'm a person. So John, if you were to say like, "God, Joe, this photo really speaks to me. I love it," I'd be like, "Dude, thank you. Like that's amazing." But I keep it. I try to keep it. Again, we were talking about clearing from the board the frustration and happiness. I try to keep them close to the same level, right? And it's a habit. It's a thing that you have to continually work on through me. It's a thing I have to continually work on through my whole life, right? So if you were to say that to me, it would mean a lot because I'm a person and it feels good. Like you get the dopamine rush, but it feels good in the same way that if you were to say, "Joe, you really suck as a photographer," I wouldn't go, "Oh my God, maybe I do. I shouldn't create anymore." I'd be like, "Well, why do you think that, John? Like,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?" And you'd be like, "Because this." Would be like, "All right, well, that's cool. That's your opinion." I don't take any of those down to my core. Like
Yeah.
the validation or the invalidation, it never hits my self-worth. It always
Ooh.
hits the surface level of this is your taste or your opinion, and that's valid and cool. And I may be upset about it or I may be happy about it, but it doesn't hit my foundation. Like
Dude,
it's not going to stop me from creating or why I create or what I create.
I love that. That like I've only learned this in I want to say the last year, 6 months to a year, that like the belief that like what's meant for me is going to find me, and the things
Mm,
that are meant to be part of my life are going to be part of my life.
yeah.
And that comes from everything from like relationships to how people interact with my work, right? Like whether someone loves something or hates something, it doesn't affect me the way that it used to
Yep.
on both ends. It all feels good and it all doesn't feel bad, which I think comes with time and understanding that what you just said is just so crucially important, because at some point you develop that self-worth that doesn't get impacted by other people's opinions of you. I mean, granted, it matters. There are instances
Sure.
where those things matter, but if you are comfortable enough to be very knowledgeable about who you are, other people's opinions and the world's interpretation of what you're doing matter less
Yeah.
to a positive perspective.
Yeah. The way I try to look at it analogy wise is like, my self-worth is never external, right? So that's my foundation, right? My foundation of my house, and that's all inside, right? I have to discover what that means to me, what it looks like, how I feel about, like, that's all inner work, right? It has nothing to do with anybody else. It's
Mm-hmm.
got to be me. And then from that, like, you build a house is the external facing aspect of what you're building on, right? So if I were to have Joe Meyerowitz, who's a great photographer and stuff, be like,
Favorite.
Joe, you're kind of shit. You need to work a lot better at it. Would that hurt me? Yeah, I'm a human being and a creative. Of course, I'd be like, oh, damn, that sucks, right? But I wouldn't go, maybe I shouldn't create anymore, right? So maybe it knocks down part of the house, but my foundation's still there. Like,
Right.
and that's where everything sits for me, is the foundation.
Yeah.
So nobody can touch that but me. I'm the only one that can change what that feels like and what that looks like and how I value myself. I'm the only one that can do that. Nobody else can do that to me.
That statement has me wondering, do you know how long or like at what point you felt like your foundation was solid? Like, do you like when did you feel like, okay, my foundation's set and done and I can start building upon it? Like, do you know when that may have felt like it happened?
So I probably can't pinpoint it. I would say it's just all, again, it comes down to the perspective. All the things we go through in life. I think I'm very fortunate to grow up. My parents, like I said, the creative aspect wasn't monetarily supported, but I had very supportive and loving parents, right? I mean, I hugged and gave my dad a kiss on the cheek, all like when he would drop me off in front of high school and shit. Like, we didn't care about
It's because you're
other.
Italian.
Well, that too, right? The Italian aspect definitely comes. Yes, 100%. That's genetic.
Yeah.
It's the same thing if you could see my hands.
Yeah.
But uh, but it was a probably not explicitly outwardly said thing of not caring what other people thought, like to an extent, right? Like, we live in a society, you have to like live in a society with other human beings, but like, as far as their perception of you or their own stories they make up about you shouldn't affect who you really are, right? So that was always kind of expressed like through actions through my life growing up, right? We lived in Philadelphia, and the neighborhood we lived in, we were the only non-Jewish family in a fully Jewish neighborhood. And it was the best place I ever lived, right? We would sit down and Seder dinners with our friends and stuff like that. Like, but it was never a difference of humanity. It was a difference of like practices and culture and stuff like that. So they didn't view us that way. As well, like, oh, you're outsiders and stuff like that, and we didn't view anybody else that way. So like, all the actions in my life kept like building on that understanding of, don't worry about what other people think of you. Like, if you can be authentically you, if you have respect and integrity, and you can lay your head down at night, that's what matters. Like, we're not here forever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why spend the time caring about what other people think of you?
Yeah, that's a wildly important perspective. I think when you look at what you said, that's more the norm. I think it's more common for people in everyday life to be like very understanding and acceptable of other
Mm-hmm.
people. And it's only when you like
Yeah.
get that fucking stupid phone in your hand that things change, right? No, I mean, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
keyboard warriors, right? I think when you step outside of real life and into that digital space, that's where things change to a detrimental perspective. But yeah, man, I think that's so important. I've just started in, say, the last 3 to 4 years, I think, finished my foundation. Like, I am so comfortable in my own skin. I'm comfortable in the things that I create. I'm comfortable in the relationships that I cultivate. And I found a path that works for me. And I think it's just something that takes time. And
Yeah.
everyone's timetable and schedule is different. And it could happen at 16 and it can happen at 60. But eventually you sort of find that happy medium of contentment and sort of still desire to do whatever it is that makes you happy.
I'm happy you said contentment too, right? Like I hear a lot, and again, this is other people, and that's fine. But like people use happiness a lot, which is fine because there's also colloquial words, right? Like it's easy to say happy than content, right? But for me, I want to try to carve out pockets of contentment in my life, not look for happiness, because happiness to me is the same as like frustration or being angry and stuff like that. Bitterness is the opposite of contentment for me, right? So, like if I can look at like a scale of my life, I want to see big chunks of contentment, right? Like that's what I want to look at.
Dude,
Be-
dude, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you know how important it
no,
is that you just said that to me? Because I've reached a point in my life where I am so happy. I have the best life. I'm so happy. I am not content at all. And I've reached the point where how do you rectify the fact that I have everything that I could ever possibly hope for and dream? My life is, by all intents and purposes, perfect. I'm happy, but I'm not content. So it's like, when do you reach that middle ground, that breaking point, that culminating spot where happiness and contentment meet? Because I'm having a hard time figuring that out, and I think it's normal. Like I'm not worried about it. I've just happened to reach a point where everything's great, but I'm not feeling. I don't know if fulfilled's the word, because I'm happy, and I think happiness and fulfillment kind of go hand in hand to some degrees, but I'm not content. And I've been talking about it a lot recently on my podcast because I'm trying to figure out, well, if I'm starting to check all these boxes that I've created for myself, goals, hopes, dreams, and I'm going down this list and I'm being like, yep, did that, yep, did that, yep, did that, but I'm not feeling content. I need to figure out how that happens.
Yeah, it's that's a really good question, and for me, contentment isn't a point to be reached, right? That's why I said like I want to see pockets of contentment because it's not going to stay, right? But for me, there's a deeper, like you said, when happiness meets fulfillment versus, like it becomes this deeper thing, right? And I want to be able to try to, because to me, contentment would be, like you said, I'm feeling happy and I got all these things going on. But if something were to hit you sideways a little bit, right? Would it take away all those feelings and understandings of what's actually real in your life? If it would, then it's probably closer to happiness. If it wouldn't, but just kind of like stick in there like a sliver a little bit where it's like, damn, this kind of sucks, right? But it doesn't push everything else out. That's what I mean by contentment, right? Like you can still recognize and feel the deeper level of where you are and who you are when little things come up and kind of like try to knock that stuff away.
I think then I might be content.
Yeah. So that's what it is. It's because it's first off, it's going to be different for everybody, right? But it's also, again, like I said, I don't believe it to be a place we reach. I think it's like recognizing those moments and kind of like just making sure you internalize them the same way that we tend to internalize the negative way more than the positive, right? So the same way you internalize like a grudge or something that you have with somebody, like, oh, that motherfucker, like if he would have called me like 2 years ago, we would have worked this out. And I still, you still think about it and you're like, why is that still here? Right? We don't do that as much with joy or happiness and stuff to where we internalize it to the level that it feels that deep in us that we do with stuff that upsets us, right?
Yeah.
But if we can try, because it's a conscious, I'm of the mind that everything is habit, good and bad, for the most part, right? Like gratitude's a good one, right? Like you see, we'll use the NFT space. You see your friends making tons of sales and stuff like that. And if your first reaction is like, oh, fuck that. Like, why nobody's buying mine, right? Then you probably got to look at yourself a little bit and be like, why am I angry? If you're angry because you're not selling, that's cool, but it has nothing to do with them. That's a new thing, right? So you can still, if you like the person and you appreciate them and you're happy, you just happen to have a moment of like, come on, then still practice gratitude and give them the celebration and like give them props. The more you do that, the more it becomes part of your character and who you are, right? And the same way that if we can recognize those moments of contentment and try to internalize it, the more it becomes habit to where we do recognize them and we can say like, oh, I want to hold on to this for a little bit. I want to feel this. I want it to sit deeper than a passing moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that actually provides me a little bit more clarity that I probably am more content than I give myself credit for. I think the likelihood is that I'm still searching for more, right? And what that more is not like things or
Hmm.
stuff or whatever. There's still more out of life that I want to accomplish and have that makes me feel like I'm maybe searching for more, but maybe it is just a deeper desire to find something else, something
Sure.
beyond what I already have, which I think that perspective actually has really helped me a lot just in this conversation, because that thought process of turning some of those happy moments and happy feelings into a habit of creating that feeling and to tie it to a level of contentment could maybe be beneficial for me moving forward. I like that.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, man, I could talk to you for hours.
So
it's crazy. It's crazy because I think what's funny is like the commonality that I've had in this podcast is being able to have conversations with creative people, and a lot of these conversations start talking about art and photography
mm,
and music and whatever it is that they do, and they ultimately morph into the conversation we just had, which is a lot about finding happiness and
mm.
understanding and growth in one's life. And I'm incredibly appreciative that you took the time out to come chat with me today, man. I'm a big fan of yours as just on a human level and as an artist level. I have a cheesy line. If you've been on my podcast, you're part of my family. And yeah, man, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
No, John, this is super dope. And same, I could talk to you for like I love these conversations, man. Like I love doing this with friends. So
Yeah.
thank you for having me
Oh,
for
no
sure.
problem, man. My pleasure. Take care.